Hello, dear children. Welcome back to economic session. This is our IED chapter 9, Environment and Sustainable Development. The economic development that we have achieved so far has come at a very high price, that is, at the cost of environmental quality. As we step into an era of globalization that promises higher economic growth, we have to bear in mind the adverse consequences of the past development path on our environment and consciously choose a path of sustainable development. To understand the unsustainable path of development that we have taken and the challenges of sustainable development, we have to first understand the significance and contribution of environment to economic development. With this in mind, this chapter is divided into three sections. The first part deals with the functions and role of environment. The second section discusses the state of India's environment, and the third section deals with the steps and strategies to achieve sustainable development. Now we are going to discuss the first section of this chapter, the functions and role of environment. Environment is defined as the total planetary inheritance and the totality of all resources. It includes all the biotic and abiotic factors that influence each other. The biotic elements of the earth are all the living elements like birds, animals, and plants, forests, fisheries, etc. The abiotic elements are air, water, land, etc. The rocks and sunlight are also examples of abiotic elements of the environment. Our environment performs four vital functions. The first, it supplies resources. The resources here include both renewable and non-renewable resources. Renewable resources are those which can be used without the possibility of the resource becoming depleted or exhausted. That is, a continuous supply of the resource remains available. Examples of renewable resources are the trees in the forest and the fishes in the ocean. The non-renewable resources are those which get exhausted with extraction and use, for example, fossil fuels. The second function is the environment assimilates waste. Third, it sustains life by providing genetic and biodiversity. Fourth, it also provides aesthetic services like scenery. The environment is able to perform these functions without any interruption as long as the demand on these functions is within its carrying capacity. This implies that the resource extraction is not above the rate of regeneration of the resources, and the waste generated are within the assimilating capacity of the environment. And when the environment fails to perform its third and vital function of life sustenance, and this results in an environmental crisis. And this is the situation today all over the world. The current environmental crisis, the rising population of the developing countries, and the affluent consumption and production standards of developed world have placed a huge stress on environment in terms of its first two functions. The many resources have become extinct, and the waste generated are beyond the absorptive capacity of the environment. The absorptive capacity means the ability of the environment to absorb degradation. The result, we are today at the threshold of environmental crisis. The industrial development has polluted and dried up rivers and other aquifers, making water an economic good. The intensive and extensive extraction of both renewable and non-renewable resources has exhausted some of these vital resources, and we are compelled to spend huge amounts of technology and research to explore new resources. Added to these are the health cost of degraded environmental quality, decline in air and water quality, have resulted in increased incidence of respiratory and waterborne diseases. Hence, the expenditure on health is also rising. The global environmental issues such as global warming and ozone depletion also contribute to increased financial commitments for the government. Thus, it is clear that the opportunity cost of negative environmental impacts are high. The supply demand reversal of environmental resources. In the early days, when civilization just began, or before this phenomenal increase in population and before countries took to industrialization, the demand for environmental resources and services was much less than their supply. This meant that pollution was within the absorptive capacity of the environment, and the rate of resource extraction was less than the rate of regeneration of these resources. Hence, environmental problems did not arise. But with population explosion and with the advent of industrial revolution to meet the growing needs of expanding population, things changed. The result was that the demand for resources for both production and consumption went beyond the rate of regeneration of the resources. The pressure on the absorptive capacity of the environment increased tremendously. This has resulted in a reversal of supply demand relationship of environmental resources. That is, we are now faced with increased demand for environmental resources and services, but their supply is limited due to the overuse and misuse. Hence, the environmental issue of waste generation and pollution have become critical today. Here is an example. The Damodar Valley is one of India's most industrialized regions. The pollutants from the heavy industries along the banks of Damodar River are converting it into an ecological disaster. So these are the demand and supply reversal of environmental resources. Now moving to the second section of this chapter, the state of India's environment. India has abundant natural resources in terms of rich quality of soil, hundreds of rivers and tributaries, lush green forests, plenty of mineral deposits beneath the land surface, vast stretch of the Indian Ocean, ranges of mountains, etc. The black soil of the Deccan Plateau is particularly suitable for cultivation of cotton, leading to the concentration of textile industries in this region. The Indo-Gangetic plains, the spread from Arabian Sea to Bay of Bengal, are one of the most fertile, intensively cultivated, and densely populated regions in the world. India's forests, though unevenly distributed, provide green cover for a majority of its population and natural cover for its wildlife. The large deposits of iron ore, coal, and natural gas are found in the country. India alone accounts for nearly 20% of world's total iron ore reserves. Bauxite, copper, chromate, diamonds, gold, lead, lignite, manganese, zinc, uranium, etc. are also available in different parts of the country. The most pressing environmental concerns of India or the challenges to India's environment. The developmental activities in India have resulted in the pressure on its natural resources, besides creating impacts on human health and well-being. The threat to India's environment poses a dichotomy. First, the threat of poverty-induced environmental degradation. Second, the threat of pollution from affluence and rapidly growing industrial sector. Air pollution, water contamination, soil erosion, deforestation, and wildlife extraction are some of the most pressing environmental concerns of India. The priority issues identified are: first is land degradation. Land in India suffers from varying degrees and the types of degradation stemming mainly from unstable use and inappropriate management practices. Some of the factors responsible for land degradation are loss of vegetation occurring due to deforestation, unsustainable fuel wood and fodder extraction, shifting cultivation, encroachment into forest lands, forest fires, and overgrazing, non adoption of adequate soil conservation measures, improper crop rotation, indiscriminate use of agrochemicals such as fertilizers and pesticides, improper planning and management of irrigation systems, extraction of groundwater in excess of the recharge capacity, open access resource, poverty of agriculture dependent people. So these are the some factors responsible for land degradation in India. The second issue is biodiversity loss. India supports approximately 17% of world's human and 20% of livestock population on a mere 2.5% of the world's geographical area. The high density of population and livestock and the competing use of land for forestry, agriculture, human settlements, and industries exert an enormous pressure on countries' finite land resources. The per capita forest land in the country is only 0.08 hectare against the requirement of 0.47 hectare to meet the basic needs. The third challenge that faces India's environment is the soil erosion. The estimates of soil erosion show that soil is being eroded at a rate of 5.3 billion tons a year for the entire country, as a result of which the country loses 0.8 million tons of nitrogen, 1.8 million tons of phosphorus, and 26.3 million tons of potassium every year. According to the Government of India, the quantity of nutrients lost due to erosion each year ranges from 5.8 to 8.4 million tons. Now, the last issue is air pollution. In India, air pollution is widespread in urban areas where vehicles are the major contributors, and in a few other areas which have a high concentration of industries and thermal power plants. The vehicular emissions are of particular concern since these are ground level sources and thus have the maximum impact on general population. The number of motor vehicles has increased from about 3 lakh in 1951 to 67 crores in 2003. In 2003, personal transport vehicles, that is, two-wheeled vehicles and cars only, constituted about 80% of the total number of registered vehicles, thus contributing significantly to total air pollution load. India is one of the 10 most industrialized nations of the world. But this status has brought with it the unwanted and unanticipated consequences such as unplanned urbanization, pollution, and the risk of accidents. The CPCB, the Central Pollution Control Board, has identified 17 categories of industries, large and medium scale, as significantly polluting. The various measures adopted by the Ministry of Environment and the central and state pollution control boards may not yield reward unless we consciously adopt a path of sustainable development. The concern for future generations alone can make the development last forever. Development to enhance our current living styles without concern to posterity will deplete the resources and degrade environment at a pace that is bound to result in both environmental and economic crisis. So this is the state of India's environment. India has abundant resources, but there are some challenges or the pressing environmental concerns in India.